Blawas was a 2631. And if you Google it, it was an electronic intercept intelligence operator. So I didn't spend time getting shot at or shooting people, but sort of behind the scenes, sort of trying to intercept intelligence on our non-allies. So that's a little bit about what I did. So I'm here to talk about WOTC and military veteran hiring incentives. The main focus is on a federal tax credit, but we're going to start this with these federal tax incentives. And I think as you look today, we'll get into WOTC, but states are really piggybacking off this federal tax credit, and they're offering credits for hiring veterans. And you don't know what you don't know. So really, you've got to be proactive in searching out and asking, hey, are there any credits for hiring veterans? These credits can be very lucrative. As you can see, New York, it's up to $15,000. There's other states that have them. We just identified some that have these hiring credits. And a lot of this requires you, the employer, or we're a service provider, we also do this. On the state side, is you got to do applications, you got to do something proactive when you hire the individual to submit it to the state, and then typically you've got to submit something after that to say, yes, they work here, we paid them, here's sort of a tabulation of that information. So it's definitely lucrative, and almost everybody pays taxes, so might as well try to get some of that government money back. WOTC, Work Opportunity Tax Credit. This has been around forever, since Ronald Reagan. It used to be called Welfare Work Tax Credit. It's morphed over time. It expires almost every year. It expired at the end of 2013. And I think somebody, I know it's up for vote, I think they might have just passed it and they extended it for this year. This credit is a credit up to $9,600, and that top credit is actually for disabled veterans. It's a process-oriented credit, meaning that you have to screen an individual, you've got to submit something to the State Department of Labor, and then you get a tax credit certificate from the State Department of Labor that you put on your federal tax return. It is non-refundable, so you have to have a tax. If you're not paying tax, it's not a great credit. But I did want to bring up on the veteran side is that there is a carve-out for not-for-profits, that if you are hiring veterans, you can actually get a credit for the veteran category. You can actually take that credit against your Social Security tax that you submit for that employee. That's only for not-for-profits. That's called a 501c3 company. So here are these credit amounts. All of these credit amounts are based on these categories, which I'll show you. But as you can see, there's these several veteran categories. What happened is in 2011, they came up with VOW, which is, when I say WOTC morphed, is they came up with these categories. It used to be focused on a lot of public assistance individuals. They came up with the veteran categories, and there's several subcategories relative to veterans. Unemployed, I'll show you those in a minute. But for certain qualified disabled veterans, you can get up to a $9,600 tax credit. It says accumulated WOTC tax credits carry forward. Not to get too much in the tax code, but this is a general business tax credit, meaning if you can't use it today, you can take it forward 20 years and use it in the future if you don't have tax to use it against today. So what are these targeted groups? There's several of them. And you know, what we do as a service, we help companies when they're screening these individuals. And I'll show you the methods we do. But there's all these different categories that we screen for. Veterans we see as a growing category. But just to put in perspective what we see today, when a company is hiring, and this is not net new people, it can be replacements, we're seeing 15 to 30% of the people they hire will qualify under one of these categories for a tax credit. And you know, given that statistics like food stamps, which is SNAP, 1 in 7 U.S. people today that are eligible to work are on food stamps, and down south it's 1 in 5. So this is a really good program to capture some tax credits and get really, awarded for hiring veterans and all these other categories.
Wrong button.
Yeah. All right, so veteran qualifications. So, if you look at the IRS code, it's a real lengthy description of all these. We've broken down, but it's not just hiring a veteran that doesn't work. It's hiring a veteran where a family member receives SNAP. If you go down to the bottom right, unemployed for at least 4 weeks, but less than 6 months, unemployed for at least 6 months. So if you read the form and you look at these, we actually broke them down into a questionnaire where it's a lot easier to read them and help the individual when they're filling this out, make sure that they're answering these correctly. But it's there's a service-related disability. One of the things when you hire a veteran, for a lot of the categories I showed you, the State Department of Labor, they can look at their database and they can say, hey, we can find this person was on food stamps. When you hire a veteran, the State Department of Labor has no clue. They don't have any records like that. So one thing that we have to, or you as the employer would have to supply to them is a copy of the DD-214, which is a discharge papers. And that needs to be collected from the individual, submitted with this other paperwork to the State Department of Labor, so they can certify that individual was truly a veteran. Now, one thing I didn't put up here, but I want to put in perspective, this whole program is based off hours worked and wages paid. And so, if they work a minimum of 120 hours, and they're a qualified veteran, and you have these other categories, and they start generating a credit based on the first year wages of 25% of the first $6,000 of wages. Once they hit 400 hours, you can see these numbers aren't really big, 400 hours, then it's 40% credit of the first $6,000 of wages. Hence, 2,400 is your typical credit. However, when you get into the veteran categories, they look at a bigger wage base to get you up to the $9,600 tax credit. These are the additional, and I'm not going to go through these, but these are all the additional categories for WOTC that are screened, and then you can generate a credit for this. So here just puts in perspective what is this worth, and we're accountants, we're conservative always. If you're hiring 100 people, this screening data identifies close to 20% of the employees are eligible for WOTC. We see that, and I don't care if you're a manufacturer, retailer, wholesaler, construction. The only time I see this doesn't work for professional firms, law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms. We're seeing 15 to 30% of the people that companies are hiring will get a credit. Between 15 and up to 30%. So we use 20 as an average. Average credit, if you probably said it's based on hours worked, we went conservative because if you got a high turnover business, you're going to get a lower credit. But if you have a business that keeps people more than 400 hours and you pay them more than 6,000, you're going to get the max credit of 2,400 or 9,600 for a veteran that meets the qualifications. So you got 20 people times $2,000 equals a gross credit of $40,000. And so this is the gift that keeps giving, because you just continually screen individuals that you hire and you generate a credit annually. And so it gets, to me, we were in New York meeting with this company, and the guy looked at us and he goes, this is like a no-brainer. And it is. I mean, to me, this is, you're missing a boat if you're not screening for WOTC, because it's a credit that is really there for employers to encourage them to hire these individuals out of these groups. So very few companies do this themselves because it's processed. You've got to submit a form to the State Department of Labor within 28 days, although I've seen companies do it. We do provide the service. How we screen individuals is 3 different ways: call center, paper-based, and web-based. And about 2 years ago, and this credit's huge. It's been around, big, all big retailers, a lot of companies screen for this. 2 years ago, the IRS finally came around and said, we'll accept an electronic signature, which is huge because prior to that, they wanted to see every form with a wet signature of that individual submitted to the State Department of Labor. Without it, you couldn't get credit. So the call center and the web-based approach, basically, call center, it's a call center, 24/7, it's bilingual. You got a real person to talk to, and basically, they go through the screening. They ask all the questions, and if that individual has any questions for them, they can ask. But at the end, this Form 8850, which is an IRS form that has to be submitted to the State Department of Labor with a couple other forms. On the call, on that phone call, they actually electronically sign it, and they're done. And so that's it. Now, if they're a veteran, the employer needs secured at DD-214, submit it to us, and we submit that along with this form to the State Department of Labor. But they electronically sign it, so it gets really rid of a ton of paperwork. And I know as part of probably hiring practices, maybe a DD-214 is already being secured anywhere to determine if somebody is honorably discharged. Maybe not, I don't know. But that a form that should be readily available. I mean, it's been a few years since I got out of the Marine Corps, and I still know where my DD-214 is. Web-based approach, same concept, set up a web link. It's all set up by legal entity. So the individual comes in. If you have access to a computer, they click on a link, they get screened, and again, electronically sign it, capture all that data. And last approach, which I didn't pencil out here, but it's paper screening. So, what we recommend is you screen the individual, you're supposed to screen them on or before the first day to hire. So typically what companies will do on the first day to hire, when they come in and do their I-9 and W-4 and all the paperwork, they screen the individual that day, capture all the data. You can use one of these 3 methods. Some companies use all of these methods depending on locations and how they're set up. And then basically capture that. What happens then is all this information goes to the State Department of Labor. They review it. You can imagine they get stacks of these things, so it takes a while for them to turn these around. Once they do, you get a certificate. That certificate entitles you to claim that tax credit on your tax return, your federal tax return. If you're a partnership, if you were a Schedule C, you could take this credit. It all flows through, gets your 1040. It doesn't have to be a C Corp, it could be an S Corp. Everything, this credit flows through. Again, if you're a partnership and you're not profitable, there potentially is a way to take the credit. It does offset, for those of you who know and hate alternative minimum tax. It does offset that, so that's positive. So here's sort of this overview of what happens. You've got your screening on the call center. You got these forms supplied to hiring manager or employee. You do the paper, if not, you do the phone and the web. You follow the state-specific requirements. Every state is different. Some states say, if you're doing paper, you can fax it. Some say we want to mail to us. You got to know the state rules. Average, so not every employee you screen is going to qualify. I mean, they may say they qualify, but then they get kicked out for some reason. But we see 90+ certification rate from the State Department of Labor. And then annually, one funny thing that I see is that companies get all these certificates and then they just sit on them. And then they're like, oh, we were supposed to claim a tax return. So one funny thing I'll leave you with, a lot of companies' big objection is we don't hire those types of people. And, you could use this program to target veterans. you know, you can say, give preference to them. I mean, it was set up in a tax code that way. You know, that's why they're encouraging you to do this. But the only time I've ever heard a good objection is we don't hire those type of people. And I'm not talking veterans, because you know that when they're applying and they put it on the application. But all these other categories, it was an Eric, which I didn't introduce, is from Indiana. So we were meeting with this trailer company, which is every trailer company over there, and the CFO said to me, "We don't hire those type of people." I'm like, "That's what everybody says." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "We hire all Amish." And so, if you know anything about Amish, they don't claim color assistance. So that was supposed to be funny. I'll look serious, so I'm gonna let that one go. So anyway, point is, you know, the government specifically focused on veteran category. They've carved it out. They have several subcategories. You know, if your company isn't doing this, you should get a process set up and start planning. So that's my. I think that's all I got. And Eric, my contact. I'm out of Columbus.